It is an exciting time to be a longevity scientist because it is a field which has blossomed. If it would be a lifespan research, I'm not interested in living till 100, and I don't think there's any point of doing that. But no, it became clear that we can work on this health span.
Hello and welcome to the Live Long and Master Aging podcast. I'm Peter Bowes. This is where we explore the science and stories behind human longevity. This episode is brought to you in association with Amazentis, a Swiss life science company that's pioneering cutting-edge, clinically validated cellular nutrition under its Timeline brand. Now, longevity research often starts with experiments involving worms, nematode worms, which are considered to be one of the best models for aging research. C. elegans has a short lifespan, making it easy to work with, and many of its genetic and molecular pathways are the same as in human beings. And that's why these little worms are so valuable in our understanding of the mechanisms involved with the diseases or conditions of old age like diabetes, frailty, and obesity. Well, to talk about that and other aspects of his work, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Johan Auwerx, a professor at the École Polytechnique Fédérale in Lausanne, Switzerland, the EPFL, where he directs the Laboratory for Integrated and Systems Physiology. Dr. Auwerx is also a scientific advisor to Amazentis. A longevity researcher, he has much experience working with worms and other organisms to better understand the aging process and perhaps how we can slow it down. Professor, welcome to the Live Long and Master Aging podcast.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Yeah, very good to meet you. You are in Switzerland. I'm on the west coast of the United States. There's no chance of you and I seeing each other in person at the moment, or indeed in the near future. So we're doing this remotely. I'm just curious how you are coping during these troubled times.
Oh, it has been tough because the lab has first been shut down and then the lab has been opened again. We're working with reduced number of people, but that's we're doing the best as we can. And actually, this COVID crisis was relevant scientifically for us, because one of the things with the COVID crisis, when people stay home, they don't move much. And so there's a quite big impact on muscle mass and muscle loss because people don't have their regular exercise, they don't have their regular movement, and especially in countries where confinement was very important, such as Italy or France, where you were not allowed out of home. So people actually lose muscle. They exercise about 40 to 50% less than normal, and for certain part of our population that could be problematic, especially if you get the disease.
So I guess that's in a way mimicking, perhaps for younger people, what older people actually experience during normal times.
True, totally true, because you see normal people, older people, they move less, which is a feature. If you look at a young worm or an old worm, you immediately see the difference because the young worm moves much more, and this is the same with people. Once you're past 70, many of us will be reduced to going from the couch to the television set and eating lunch and dinner. And so this movement is reduced, and now you see this in younger people. Because they were confined to their homes. And this has an immediate impact on muscle mass and even muscle function. So they don't recover. You never recover the muscle which you lose. And even in young people, this can lead to major impact on physical activity.
That's interesting, and it's maybe a side effect, a long-term side effect of this disease that clearly a lot of people won't have thought about, and it does raise many issues, doesn't it, about how we live our lives during normal times and the importance of strong muscles.
Yeah, and you start realizing that if you ever have broken a leg or have been immobilized in a cast, you see how long usually the cast, being in the cast is not the problem. The problem is that afterwards you have 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months of revalidation, and that's where you try to recover the muscle. And every time you lose muscle, you won't recover fully. And that's the problem with the aging population, obviously, because they are losing muscle mass to the point they become sarcopenic and eventually frail. And this is the main reason. It's one of the people don't realize, but losing mobility is one of the main reasons why aging is not good for you. because you lose social contact, you lose mobility, you lose independence. And it's very important that people keep moving and maintain this capacity to move.
And one of the other aspects of this disease, I think, that in terms of highlighting issues with our health, and that is more generally underlying conditions, because I think we know now that those people with serious diseases, whether it is diabetes or heart disease or other conditions, do seem to be more susceptible to this virus. And it does highlight, doesn't it, the importance of just generally looking after ourselves, to making sure that we are in the best condition possible to be able to confront a virus like this.
Yeah, very true. Because one thing which you don't imagine, most people who die of COVID, respiration is important. Respiration is muscle function. When you respire, it's your diaphragm and your muscles of your thorax will keep going. If you get a COVID infection in an older person which has lost a significant number of its muscle mass, you see, then you're in worse shape. And this is also how these other comorbidities impact on the disease. So the better you start off, the better you will cope with it.
So let's, before we delve into your science and your work, maybe just talk a little bit about your career. If you could give me a little bit of a potted history as to the kind of work that you've been doing and how you started and what inspired you to do this kind of work.
So I'm medically trained, so I'm a medical doctor. I'm actually a registered endocrinologist, and I started off by being interested in obesity and metabolic diseases. Did a postdoctoral fellowship in the University of Washington, where I worked in the Department of Medical Genetics and also in the Division of Metabolism and endocrinology. Then I returned into set up my own lab when I came back in France, and spent actually most of my career working in France, first in the Institut Pasteur in Lille, and then later on in the IGBMC in Strasbourg. First as a CNRS researcher, a staff researcher, and later as a professor in medicine and biochemistry. Until recently, 12 years ago, not so recent anymore, I decided to move to Switzerland because I got opportunity to take a superb job at the EPFL, the École Polytechnique Fédérale, which satisfied all my criteria because it was a good environment. Switzerland is very supportive of its researchers. It's good funding. So I decided to move to Lausanne, and that's where I'm still.
And moving from being a medical doctor and the disciplines that involves to more of a researcher, I'm often curious as to what the mindset is there that makes a scientist want to do that.
One of the things was, I was a little bit frustrated. I liked being a medical doctor, but on the long term, it's like monotonous, because as a diabetologist, you see diabetics, and it's become a little bit less challenging every day because you know the field inside out. So I was wondering, where do I contribute the most? Do I contribute most in treating like hundreds of diabetics and giving them a better life, curbing their symptoms? Or if I start doing applied research, and all our research is like really medically oriented, so our lab is very, very translational. So that means I was seeing my job as contributing to the medical world, as instead of trying to develop and identify new ways to treat metabolic diseases. And that's what has been the focus of my lab since the last 20-30 years.
And just to explain for our audience, when you say metabolic diseases, that can cover a lot, can't it?
Yeah, can. And this is also quite interesting. When I was starting my career, metabolic diseases was diabetes and hyperlipidemia, high lipid levels in the blood, high cholesterol. And now you see that this metabolism has become so essential in many aspects of our daily thinking about medicine and about biology. It's contributing to everything. Now you have neurometabolism, immunometabolism, cancer metabolism, and the real hardcore metabolism where I started working on has now become almost not a peripheral field, but just like one of many fields where metabolism has an impact. And I would say many of these fields where you see that actually the disease, the underlying causes, are really metabolic. Like, for instance, why does a cancer cell grow better? Because it has a better way to exploit the metabolites around it, the nutrients. It has a better way to harvesting the energy. So it can predominate on the surrounding normal cells. And the same with why do we get Alzheimer's disease? Probably because our energy supply to our brain cells becomes limiting at a certain time, and that predisposes you to all these insults. And Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease all have a very big anchorage in metabolic dysfunction.
And much of your work has been based on understanding how our metabolisms are controlled. And that involves a lot. It involves diet and exercise and hormones. It's a labyrinth, isn't it? It's a complex equation.
Yeah, this is a complex equation, and hence also the name from my lab, Systems Physiology, because I think physiology is controlled by many things. First of all, our genes. You know, physiology is different in everyone because your genetic makeup is different. But then also how we interact with the environment, what you eat, how you exercise, how your lifestyle is, are you a stressed person or not. And this is a very complex mixture. And so to identify or study that in humans is very difficult. That was also one of the reasons why I wanted to go to research, because no human is the same, no human is eating the same, is exercising the same, is having the same stress levels. And this in disease in animal models you can much better mimic. You know, I can control my mouse that they eat exactly the same thing every day, that they're exposed at the same light-dark cycle, the same stress level, and that makes then that you accentuate, and it's easier to find new things because they're not confounded by all these other factors which influence the outcome, the phenotypes.
And you say we are all different, and that's increasingly obvious to us. I'm curious, in terms of your work, what do you better understand now that perhaps can help people understand how we react in different ways to, and as probably the most common one is how we react in different ways to diets, and how some diets fail, how some are successful, we respond positively to some food combinations and not to others.
Yeah, this is, in a large extent, so the diet is an environmental factor, and your diet will be different than my diet. So then we have the second very important factor is our gut microbiome, which digests and helps us digest, which is widely different between people or different nations, or where you live, whether you eat a lot of seafood, etc. Then we have our own obviously our own genetic makeup, which is also very important, how you react to a thing. And it's not only our genetic makeup, it's also our time in, I would say, our time in development. And I'm giving you a very easy example. If you are young and you become very quickly fat, like for instance a young boy who gets weight on, that's extremely bad. If you're at the end stage of your life, let's say you're 88 and you're fat, you're going to be more protected. So the same thing, gaining weight while being young is a risk factor, whereas a positive factor towards the end stages of your life. And so this makes it very complicated because that's another dimension, that's the longitudinal dimension, which is often neglected in many studies. And this you also only can almost mimic in animal models. In humans, it's very difficult to do these long-term longitudinal studies.
And just talking about fat there, that is because fat has many, many functions. And clearly those functions, as you say, according to our age, might vary in their importance according to the stage of life that we're in. And those side effects of being fat can clearly be very negative. And I think that's the one that most people understand and get, that generally being overweight, and especially tummy fat, stomach fat, is not good for us.
Yeah, no. And like I say, so that's why dietary advice can almost not be universal. Because you see, when I'm counseling this young kid who becomes obese, I need to say, curb your calories. When I counsel this older person who's barely having enough energy to keep his muscle and his system functioning, I should say, take more protein, take more fat, take more glucose. And this is what often is neglected. So you have no universal dietary advice. And so the whole field of the microbiome complicated things even more further, because we ignore largely our microbiome. I don't know, there's only no studies coming out. Like for instance, there's this interesting food stuff we're working on, which is called nori. Nori is stable in Japanese food. It's the seaweed, it's the green thing around your sushi. This is very healthy, but only if you're Japanese, because you have eaten so much of the seafood that you have adapted the bacteria which can digest it. Whereas if I or you would eat it, we wouldn't have the same health benefits.
It's interesting, a friend of mine, a scientist in this country, in the United States, has said to me in the past that, look, he said, you come from Europe. I was born in northeast England. That kind of diet that people eat in England is what my body is used to. Therefore, changing to and adapting to a new diet won't necessarily be good for me and good for my body.
Yeah. When I was still a medical resident at the University of Washington, I spent time in Seattle. There was this big study where they were looking at Japanese living in Japan, Japanese living in Hawaii, and Japanese living in the continental US, and you saw a clear gradient there because they were more and more exposed to the Western diet, high fat content, and it's not sure that every Japanese will react the same way. There's some probably who deal well with it and some not.
And the fact that, and as you've explained, there is no one diet that we can say is going to be good for everyone, and we've got a growing understanding of that. And of course, it does explain why there's a tremendous amount of confusion and, I've got to say, frustration amongst people that they just don't understand what is going to be the best course of action for themselves. And it poses a challenge, I assume, for people like you and for me to explain the science and where we are, and not to advise people, but just to share those ideas in a way that they make sense to people, that people can then try to evaluate for themselves how to conduct their lives.
Yeah, no. And a good example was even the medical profession is sometimes not well informed. The advice whether, I grew up in the time when eating fat was bad and you needed to go on a carb diet. If you grow up now, you would hear the opposite. That's because science evolves, and what we knew at that time was linked and focused on one disease type, and so things change over the course as we learn more.
Well, I want to talk in some more detail now about worms, nematode worms. I mentioned your research with worms in the introduction, as so many longevity scientists do, because they are such a good model, as I explained briefly. But maybe you can explain in better terms and more detailed terms why you work with these tiny organisms.
First reason is they're genomically very similar, so they have the same genes, mainly the same genes as we do. That's the first reason. B, they're very easy to modify genetically. So if you want to knock out or introduce an overexpression of a gene, it takes days or not even hours for certain circumstances if you use RNAi, which in a mouse takes like months. Third reason is that they are an excellent model for longevity because researchers are impatient as anyone. So if you would do a longevity study in a mouse, it takes 3 years. If you do it in humans, you cannot do it. You need 4 generations. If you do it in a worm, you can do it in a month. So I think the worm is an excellent model. You need to know its capacities, but also its limitations. So certain things are very well mimicked in the worm. Longevity, mitochondria, mobility is very well mimicked. But if I'm an endocrinologist, I would be interested in research and communications between organs where you require hormones and circulation. Then the worm would be a poor model. Like, for instance, we're working on some genes in the heart. The worm doesn't have a heart. So you cannot mimic. So you need to know the benefits and the limitations. And most of our work is related to aging and muscle function, and they're excellent models.
And is it easy in terms of management in the laboratory to work with these creatures? You would assume it must be, since they're so and they are very tiny, aren't they? Yeah,
you need a scope for it. It's actually very easy. Believe it or not, before I came to Lausanne, I never saw a C. elegans. So I hired a postdoc with expertise. This was about 12 years ago, and we set it up. And now my entire lab is working it. So it's very low cost. So it's compared to a mouse experiment, it's very fast, it's low cost. Another advantage, and that's where we benefited on, we got a few grants for 3R because they're invertebrates. So you're not confronted on all the animal authorizations. So it makes life in one way easier because you don't have the ethical concerns which are coming with bigger animals.
That is very interesting. And to the point that you made just a few moments ago about longevity research more generally, that by its very nature, longevity, it is a long time. And ultimately, all of your research, you will want it to apply to and be relevant in human beings. So I guess at some point, those studies have to progress towards the human trials, and that's where things are going to start to slow down.
No, they will. That's where they. So we usually use worms, and then if we make an observation in the worm, then we translate into mammalian cells, because there is this phenomenon of senescence, cells become older also. And then obviously we quite often translate into the mouse. We have a lot of genetically modified mouse models. But what we now do often is jump from the worm straight to the human, because with the genetics is so powerful. Now we have all these large cohort studies. One famous one is the UK Biobank, where people collected more than 500,000 British people and did whole genome sequencing. They're now in the process of doing whole genome sequencing. They SNP genotyped them and they collected phenotypes. So if I know a gene in the worm, which is variant, which causes a phenotype, I can now almost bioinformatically, by using these large databases, these cohorts, confirm what I find in a worm. Like for instance, and we have just recently finished a study where we were looking at a new gene involved in ceramide synthesis. Ceramide is a type of lipid, a kind of weird lipid, which is the basis of wax. And so we found a gene by worm studies, but when we looked in the UK Biobank, we saw that mutations in this gene were associated with loss of motility. The same as in our worm. Our worm didn't move. The humans have like less grip strength, less exercise capacity. So that was a perfect example where you skip all the mouse and monkey and non-human primate research and go straight into humans.
And if we just step back and think about what you've just said, the correlation between what is happening to a nematode worm, this tiny organism, and what can happen potentially in a human being, it's quite staggering, isn't it?
It's fascinating. It's but the same basic principles of biology are maintained there. Worm, why are we humans here? We're here to reproduce. We're here to feed ourselves. All these basic functions are conserved. If you go into more elaborate functions, you would even be astonished how much is conserved. Like brain function, worm has about a little bit over 900 cells. 300 of them are neurons. So in proportion, a worm has even more brains than humans, or brain cells than humans.
Interesting. Some of your especially fascinating research involves extending the lifespan of C. elegans, the nematode worm. Can you just talk me through that?
So what we generally do is we look at worms and see how their lifespan is affected. And then we have several ways of trying to improve or increase lifespan, and that could be by genetically mutating a number of genes in the worm, but it could also be by giving them compounds. We give them certain food substances, or we can give them certain drugs, and then we can see whether they prolong the lifespan of the worm. And then due to the easy genetics, we can also very easily identify the genes which you hit with a compound, because we can take, you have all this possibility to RNAi gene knockdown, loss of function studies, which gives you actually the mechanism very, very fast. And so we're now we're starting to gear up, even do drug screening in the worm, and which is quite different than what usually you do when a drug screen. A drug screen, you throw a compound on an enzyme, a protein, and then you see whether it activates or inhibits it. And then the second step is you throw it on a cell and you see whether it does the same thing in a cell. And the third thing is you go to an animal model. If you do it in a worm, you can skip step 1 and 2. Because if you know the target, you do it immediately in a worm. And what more information you get out of this is that you also know whether the compound is toxic. Because if a worm doesn't like the drug, it will crawl off the plate. You will see that they die, or you see that they suffer. So it's in one way a model for drug discovery, and at the same time a model of toxicology in vivo already.
And my conversation with Professor Auwerx continues in a moment. You're listening to the Live Long and Master Aging podcast. This episode is brought to you in association with Amazentis, a Swiss life science company that's pioneering cutting-edge, clinically validated cellular nutrition under its Timeline brand. And we're going to talk about Timeline's product MitoPure, which is a highly pure form of Urolithin A, a compound some of us are able to produce in our guts from elagitannins, compounds that we get from fruits like pomegranates, select berries and nuts. It's a complex sequence of events, and we're about to hear why it matters to all of us as we grow older.
It started off by working on pomegranate extracts, actually, which wasn't yet purified urolithin A, and so we saw that these pomegranate extracts were beneficial on worms. We also saw that they had beneficial effects on cells, and I can go in details about what the beneficial effects were. And so by then looking at the ingredients in pomegranate extract, we came to this urolithin A. And then we could work with a single compound. Instead, we were working with a mixture. We could reproduce the same beneficial effects of the pomegranate. And then we knew that we had an active compound. And that compound is actually increasing the lifespan of the worm. But more important for me than increasing the lifespan is increasing the health span. And let me explain to you what health span means. I'm not very interested in living until 90 years and spending the last 20 years of my life going from the television to the fridge and eating, etc. So I'm interested in staying vigorous, active, outgoing, socially active for the latter part of my life. And that's what health span is. So we need to keep the people active. That's beneficial just until you really or at the edge that you cannot live further. And this we evaluated in a worm, and this was striking because the thing is that worms fed on urolithin look youthfully. They move like young worms. You know, an old worm, if you look at a worm plate, you need to poke it with a little stick, and then it moves its head. And that's what all it does. It moves its head and feeds on the bacteria there. If you have a vigorous young worm, it will move like it crawls on the plate, it explores the things. And so this is what you really want. You don't want them to make longer and just move their head. You want them to be agile, to be healthy. And that's what we saw with this urolithin, that we really kept them in very, very good shape.
And I'm glad you brought up health span before I did, because I normally drop that into the conversation very quickly, because it is something, and you describe it beautifully, it is something that I feel very passionately about, so passionately that I call my company Health Span Media, which is producing this podcast, because it is a concept that is so important, I think, to all of us, for exactly those reasons, that we want to live long and be healthy, and perhaps have that period of time that ends in death to be very short, compressed morbidity, as people often talk about. And I think the challenge, again, for scientists and media people as well, is to explain that concept, because once you get it, it is easy to appreciate, isn't it?
Yes. And I'm often asked this question, do you think it's ethical to work on lifespan? Because people, you see, with all the increasing health costs, people are concerned. You know, why would we keep people longer in life if we have already a huge burden on them? And then the right answer is we don't want to keep people longer in life. We want them to be healthy and exit when they are, you know, when the system has reached its limits. And that's what health span is. You know, you just push the borders and you make people active and moving well for a long time.
And in terms of health span, one issue that fascinates me is the fact that we actually understand a lot of the science already, and we know about those issues and those chronic diseases of old age, and generally, and I'm talking in general terms, how to either prevent those diseases or significantly slow down their progress by adopting different lifestyles that involve a better diet. And certainly, as far as I'm concerned, that is a diet that has more fruits and vegetables and less red meat. Others disagree with that. And a lifestyle that includes a lot of exercise. They're very simple and kind of old-fashioned, but they work.
Yeah, and they are very important for the simple reason is that a drug will not affect health span. We have already too much medical expenses, so we need to change the quality of life by simple measures which everyone can afford, which society can afford. So let's suppose I find a drug which costs like $10 a day, which would extend lifespan. That would economically be unsustainable. If you would find a food or a lifestyle change which does the same, that would make a major impact. And that, I think, is also an important realization for people interested in this area. The most changes have to come from very inexpensive things which are accessible to all, because otherwise we're not going to reduce the burden of long life on the society.
But at the same time, do you accept, and this is where my understanding and my beliefs have evolved over time, that some supplementation is good? And I often say it's an insurance policy because we don't live perfect lives in terms of exercise and diet, and therefore some supplementation, and we're coming back to Urolithin A, a pure form, MitoPure, which is the pure form of Urolithin A, which we've talked a lot about, and I know your research is very relevant to this, that is a form of supplementation that could be beneficial to us.
Yes, and this is still, I would consider in the category which is non-expensive, because this is like buying a yogurt or eating some additional food or fruit. So it's in this price category. So there, I think, you're hitting the right spot. And we start knowing that all through the last 20 years, we worked on a lot of natural products, which are so-called GRAS, which mean they're non-toxic, identified active components in them, like urolithin. Another one is a component where we work on nicotinamide riboside. And we see that they have enormous benefits. They have benefits as strong as drugs. They're cheap. They're easily accessible. So this goes into that category where you can help and improve public health.
And I'm interested with Urolithin A in terms of the beneficial effects in terms of endurance. And I know you've done experimentation with mice in this respect.
Yeah, we have done first experimentation in the worms, because we can actually test endurance in the worm. You can have the worm move in liquid. It's like a worm in a swimming pool, and you can have the worm like 1 minute swim against the current. If you do that 3-4 times, then you can see whether the worm trains well. If you do that experiment with a worm on urolithin, it becomes a super swimmer. And in mice, you can actually put them on endurance running. Mice are natural runners. Regular mice runs kilometers a night. So they're active in the night, so they run. If you give them a running wheel, some mice run 5 kilometers a night. If you do that with urolithin, you see that they really are improving performance. And you can also see that endurance, which they have if you really run them until exhaustion, because on the running wheel, that's not until exhaustion, because they like to run. That's a spontaneous training. If you make them run until exhaustion, you see that they significantly, by 30-40%, extend the capacity that they can run.
And is there evidence that this extends to human beings?
There is evidence, because there's not, I'm involved in Amazentis, as we said before, so they have been starting doing studies in humans. And all the indicators go that it really also have beneficial effects on exercise capacity in humans. This has not been tested in athletes. This has been tested in older people, and you see that there are significant effects. I'm not sure whether any supplement, this is an interesting question in this interesting domain. Whether, let's say you have a top athlete, whether by providing a supplement you could make him better. I'm not sure about urolithin there, but I'm sure about a couch potato, you can make him much better with urolithin.
If our endurance is significantly improved, apart from the fact that we all want to be able to do more and physically do more. Runners, joggers want to be able to run faster. And if you're lifting weights, you want to be able to increase your performance. But then just applying it to ordinary people, you want to be able to walk that extra mile to work if you need to, or to school, or to come home from the supermarket carrying your shopping and not be out of breath when you get there. Very basic advantages. But in addition to all of that, the very fact that it is encouraging us, if you like, to exercise more because it is easier, the knock-on effect of greater physical activity is going to help us in other ways as well.
Yeah, no. If you are more active and you're better active, your metabolism becomes better. You're going to burn more calories. You're probably going to lose weight and keep your weight easier. So you're going to feel better. We know that the best prevention for Alzheimer's is daily exercise. We don't understand why it is yet, but you see, it will have an impact. Frailty is, like I say, a crucial aspect of aging. It's like you cannot move. Aging is you need to be able to think, you need to be able to have your sensory systems to work, need to have your motor system to work. The motor system is often the thing which degrades the fastest. And if urolithin could help your motor system active, all the rest will follow. You see, you gotta have a better cognitive function because exercise is preventing neurodegenerative diseases, is preventing like loss in cognition. So you will have a mass impact, not only on the muscle.
And just to use the word frailty there, I think I used it a little bit earlier, just to dive a little deeper into what frailty means. I think the common understanding is a frail old person who's perhaps a little stooped and perhaps prone to falling over. But it's more than that, isn't it, in terms of how our body is functioning?
It's much more in that. So sarcopenia is loss of muscle mass. Frailty is really you lose independence. It's like you say, you're prone to all these diseases. You're not moving anymore. Like you say, one of the main reasons why people break their femurs and actually become bedridden is because they're frail. They're not stable when they move. They cannot move as they want. Major reason for falls and stability. So it's like really a very bad, frailty is like, I can't call it a syndrome, but it's a very, very bad sign if you become frail when you're old. If you're an older person, I was saying to you that you actually really want to keep the weight. Frailty is also associated with muscle loss and usually weight loss. So that's why also in these older people, we need to give good dietary advice, that we keep their energy reserves up.
Crucially important for all of us, especially as we're living in a world now where there are more people over the age of 65 than there are under 5 for the first time. And we're all clearly all moving in that direction, which just highlights the importance of taking those proactive measures as we are younger. And younger can be 20 or 30, or it can be 50 or 60. There's no age at which we can't do anything to improve ourselves as we get older.
Yeah, true, yes. You can start with these things. You need to adapt the healthy lifespan as soon as possible. And if you do it at 20, you will have more benefit than if you do it at 40 or if you do it at 60. And these small measures like dietary supplements, like exercising, lifestyle changes will do miracles in the long run.
So in a similar vein then, as you look forward in your life, and this is one of my favourite questions with people that I interview, I'm curious, based on your research and the knowledge that you've gleaned over the years, how do you apply it to your own life with your longevity in mind? So
if I would apply it to my life, first thing is I exercise every day. So I'm not vigorous exercise, I'm not an exercise freak, but I walk, I swim as much as possible. Second, I try to reduce stress because I think that's a hidden factor. Our society has become too stressful, like all our devices, you want to answer computers all the time, your emails. You need to be able to disconnect, sleep well. This is part of this lifestyle changes. I would say that's the second thing. And the third thing is you need to eat healthy. And there I try to do, I adapt my diet to the situation. I'm now eating differently than when I was 20. I'm probably eating no more than when I was 20 because I know I get in this crucial age range where I need probably the more energy supply, and I try to supplement my diet with healthy things. like for instance, taking nicotinamide riboside, urolithin supplements in certain times, I do that. And I adapt that to my needs. I feel when I need to be boosted, I need when, you see, it's like natural, you're not overdoing it. There's people who take like 10 supplements, I would never do that.
That was an interesting point. You raised a question in my mind. You mentioned NAD and you were talking about urolithin A. You see no issue, and clearly both are focused on mitochondrial health, ultimately on muscle strength. You see no issues in taking at least those two types of supplementation?
No. I think because they have very different mechanism of action in one way. Like urolithin has a very particular mechanism which is geared towards aging. And your mitochondria, when you age, they suffer. They accumulate damage, reactive oxygen species, which are damaging. And so what urolithin does is it clears up your damaged mitochondria, and basically then afterwards regenerates your new mitochondria, which are not damaged. So it's like purging the old ones and letting the new and healthy ones survive.
This is mitophagy.
Yeah, mitophagy, yeah. Correct. Nicotinamide riboside or nicotinamide mononucleotide, NAD boosters, they just boost number of mitochondria. They don't have this major effect on clearing the damaged mitochondria. So they do it ignorant what's the starting point. So actually you could envision a team where you would say, I first take a cycle of urolithin, I clear up my bad ones, and then I supplement with NR, and then I go off the NR, and then you're fine. So we don't know yet in humans also the exact dose, the exact way of administration. Do you need to take it continuously? Do you need to take pulses, clear out, wait a little bit? So these are all things which we're going to have to find out by research, and I don't have the answer for that. But it's fascinating that all these possibilities exist. This is what we call mitochondrial medicine. This was a field which wasn't existing like 10 years ago. That we know of all these tools to fine-tune our mitochondria.
And as you say, there are still questions outstanding. It is ongoing science. I'm interested to know where you stand on giving something a go and trying it without fully understanding it. So without fully understanding the long-term implications of a certain supplementation, or indeed without fully understanding the absolute correct dose. There is a point at which you say, this is safe, and I'm going to try it.
Yeah. So the main reason why I think it's safe is because it's a it's a product which we have been exposed to all over our life. If you go to Turkey or the Middle East, people drink pomegranate juice all the time. So it is a compound which has been taken by humans safely for a long time. What we don't know is what we don't know is whether it in all conditions is safe, whether it's in all disease situations is safe. And that's where clinical trials are for, because that's what clinical trials are designed for. You test it now in a particular configuration like sarcopenia. And then you will see, yes, it's safe in sarcopenia. That doesn't mean that we can then conclude, we can give it for any other disease. That will require another trial. But I feel okay about these supplements which we're mentioning about, because people have been exposed to them so long. And there's definitely health benefits of people eating a Mediterranean diet who drink their pomegranate juice every day, and this makes it easier. You don't have to press your pomegranate. You can take just a supplement.
Would you say, I detect it in your tone and your voice, it's an exciting time to be a longevity scientist?
It is an exciting time to be a longevity scientist, because it is a field which has blossomed. It's 20 years ago people were actually not so the longevity science was seen with like a kind of marginal view in science, because people were saying, this is all a little bit so and so. And I think now we know much more mechanism, and we know how the field has also changed from lifespan to health span, which is a big difference. You see, if there would be a lifespan research, I'm not interested in having living till 100, and I don't think there's any point of doing that. But now it became clear that we can work on this health span, and that's where I'm excited about.
And as you look forward to whatever your great age is, whether it is 80 or 90 or 95 and maybe even 100, who knows, what's the main driving force for living long and being healthy? In other words, pursuing a good health span. A lot of people ask, leaving aside lifespan, but even just health span, what is your main motivation as a man living in this world, sometimes struggling as we always do, just getting through the day? But what is your main motivation to live as long and healthy as you can?
Because I think the main motivation is social interactions, interacting with your family. You enjoy things what you're doing. If that stops, then probably it's not so healthy. So I think that's the main motivation. You need to feel useful for the society. And I think if you're healthy, you're useful for the society. If you live like societies where people live long are usually societies where people are very strongly clustered, like in Okinawa in Japan or in certain islands in the Mediterranean. You see that it's where the grandparents care for the children, the grandchildren. So where the grandparents transmit their dietary uses and habits to the younger generation. It's where the grandparents, which is also striking, most of the societies where people live long are mountainous because they are exercising more. If you need to walk like 15 flights because you need to climb the hill every day, you're exercising. So this is I think that's why I think you want to live longer, because you want to maintain that. If that's not part of your life, you might question, do I want to live longer? And this is also, I had once in a discussion with a person from health insurance company. If you see all the people going into retirement homes or senior communities, they do much worse than people who stay in their anchored in their local family life, in their small cities, where they see their grandchildren. You saw this with COVID crisis. One of the big problems was the grandchildren couldn't see the grandparents. I think it brings us back to COVID. You see, this is what keeps the cycle alive. Why you want to live longer.
You're absolutely right. COVID does highlight so many of these crucial issues in our lives. And the exciting, horrible though it is, I think one of the exciting aspects of this is that it has raised these issues in our minds, and I think longer term we can benefit from some of the things that we've learned.
Certainly, and like I say, also the fact that we move no less, that there's less dependence on airplanes, etc. This is also a thing where we drastically were confronted with COVID. We saw what we learned there, and I think this is one thing which you learned. That was a big thing, that the grandchildren and the grandparents couldn't get together. So why do you want to live healthier and longer? Because you want that family ties to be happening, and that will make you better.
Dr. Auwerx, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. And
if you'd like to find out more about Johan's work, I'll put some links into the show notes for this episode. You'll find them at the Live Long and Master Aging website, lamapodcast.com, LLAMA podcast.com. The Llama Podcast is a HealthSpan media production. This episode was brought to you in association with Amazentis, a Swiss life science company which is pioneering cutting-edge, clinically validated cellular nutrition under its Timeline brand. And if you enjoy what we do, you can rate and review us at Apple Podcasts. It's always good to know what you think about what we're doing and perhaps what you'd like us to cover in the future. You can follow us in social media at Llama Podcast and direct message me at Peter Bowes. Many thanks for listening.